Hello friends. Welcome to a night you won't forget. If you're here for spine-tingling stories that make your heart race and your skin crawl, then this is the perfect place for you. I'm about to share with you my true story, the night I was abducted, told to the sound of rain. But before we dive in, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss another thrilling tale like this one. Let me know where you're listening from by leaving a comment below. I'd love to hear from all corners of the world. And guess what? I have something special just for you. Click the link in the description below to learn more. Now let's get started. It was a dark, stormy night when it happened. The kind of night where even the bravest hearts feel a little uneasy. Rain poured down hard outside my window, tapping softly on the glass like tiny fingers trying to get in. Inside, everything was quiet except for the soft hum of the heater keeping me warm under my blankets. But as I lay there trying to fall asleep, something strange began to happen. I remember feeling safe at first. My room smelled like lavender candles I had lit earlier, and the faint glow of my bedside lamp made shadows dance across the walls. It felt cozy, almost magical. But as time passed, those dancing shadows started to change. They grew darker, longer, and stranger. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. After all, who doesn't see weird things when they're half asleep? But then I heard it, a soft creak coming from the corner of the room. It wasn't loud enough to wake anyone else in the house, but it was loud enough to make my heart skip a beat. I froze, staring wide-eyed into the darkness. Was it the wind? Maybe a branch scraping against the wall? Or could it be something else? The sound came again, closer this time. A low groan, almost like an old door slowly opening. My breath caught in my throat as I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Yet deep down I knew better. There was no way it could have been the wind or a tree branch making such a sound. This was different. This was real. As the minutes ticked by, the noises grew louder and more frequent. Footsteps echoed faintly through the hallway, each step heavier than the last. They weren't human footsteps either. They sounded too heavy, too deliberate, as if whatever was walking wanted me to hear it coming. Panic set in, and I pulled the blanket over my head, hoping beyond hope that whatever it was would pass me by. But it didn't. Instead, the footsteps stopped right outside my door. For what felt like hours, I lay there trembling, listening to the silence that followed. Then, without warning, the doorknob turned ever so slightly. It wasn't fast or sudden. It moved deliberately, as if testing whether I was awake. My stomach churned as I realized the door was unlocked. Anyone or anything could walk in. And then it did. The door opened slowly, inch by inch, revealing a shadowy figure standing in the doorway. I couldn't see its face clearly, only the outline of its body, tall and imposing. Its presence filled the room, suffocating every bit of air around me. I wanted to scream, to call out for help, but my voice refused to work. All I could do was stare, paralyzed with fear. The figure stepped inside, moving silently despite its size. Each movement sent shivers down my spine, and I swear I could feel its eyes boring into mine. It stood there for a moment, studying me before taking another step forward. That's when I noticed something odd. It wasn't walking normally. Its legs bent backward, almost like an animal's, and its arms hung low, dragging along the floor. By now, my mind was racing. What was this thing? Was it some kind of creature? An alien? Or maybe something worse? A ghost haunting my home? Whatever it wasn't friendly. I could sense its malice, its intent to harm me. And yet, I remained frozen, unable to move or fight back. Then, the unimaginable happened. The creature reached out with one of its long, claw-like hands and grabbed the edge of my blanket. Slowly, carefully, it pulled it away, exposing me to the cold air of the room. I closed my eyes tight, bracing myself for whatever came next. But instead of attacking, the creature simply loomed over me, breathing heavily. Its breath smelled foul, like rotting wood and damp earth, and it made my stomach turn. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as I waited for the inevitable. Finally, the creature spoke. Its voice was low and guttural, barely recognizable as human. "You belong with us," it growled, the words sending chills up my spine. Before I could react, strong hands wrapped around my wrists and yanked me out of bed. I screamed, kicking and thrashing, but it was no use. The creature was far stronger than any person I'd ever met. Once outside my room, the hallway seemed endless, stretching farther than I remembered. The walls shifted and twisted as we walked, creating strange patterns that made me dizzy. Behind us, other creatures emerged from the shadows, their glowing eyes watching silently as we passed. Some looked like animals, others like twisted versions of humans, and still others defied description entirely. Their laughter echoed through the halls, high-pitched and eerie, making my blood run cold. We eventually reached a large wooden door at the end of the corridor. The creature pushed it open, revealing a staircase leading downward into darkness. Without hesitation, it dragged me down, the steps creaking beneath our weight. The air grew colder with each step until finally we reached the bottom. Down here, the world was completely different. Gone were the familiar sights and sounds of my home. Instead, I found myself in a vast underground cavern illuminated by flickering blue flames. Strange symbols covered the walls, glowing faintly in the dim light, while strange creatures scurried about, going about their business as if nothing unusual was happening. In the center of the cavern stood a massive throne carved from black stone. Seated upon it was a figure cloaked in shadows, its face hidden from view. As we approached, the creature holding me dropped to one knee, bowing its head in respect. "Master," it rasped, "we have brought the chosen one." The figure on the throne stirred, raising a hand to dismiss the creature. "Leave us," it commanded, its voice echoing throughout the cavern. Obediently, the creature released me and backed away, disappearing into the shadows. Alone now, I stood trembling before the mysterious figure, unsure of what awaited me. The figure rose from its throne, stepping into the light for the first time. Its face was terrifying, a mixture of human and monster, with sharp teeth and glowing red eyes. Yet, despite its appearance, there was something oddly mesmerizing about it, something that drew me in against my will. "Welcome," it said, its voice smooth and hypnotic. "You are destined to join us." I wanted to argue, to tell it I wouldn't go willingly, but somehow I couldn't find the strength. The figure's gaze held me captive, forcing me to listen to every word it spoke. "Your journey begins tonight," it continued. "Prepare yourself, for the road ahead will test your courage, your strength, and your sanity." Just as I thought things couldn't get worse, the ground beneath me began to shake. Rocks tumbled from the ceiling, and the cavern walls groaned under the pressure. Chaos erupted all around me as creatures fled in terror, screaming in languages I couldn't understand. In the midst of the turmoil, the figure extended a hand toward me, beckoning me closer. "Come," it urged. "Your destiny awaits." And with that, the world went black. When the world went black, I didn't feel pain or hear anything. It was as if time itself had stopped. But then, slowly, the darkness began to shift. At first, it felt like waking up from a deep sleep, but this wasn't normal. This was something else entirely. My eyes fluttered open, and I found myself lying on cold, damp ground. The air smelled foul, like rotting leaves mixed with iron, and every breath I took made my chest ache. I tried to sit up, but my body refused to obey. My arms and legs felt heavy, like they were filled with sand. Panic set in as I realized I couldn't move at all. That's when I noticed the chains. Thick, rusty metal links wrapped tightly around my wrists and ankles, holding me down. They dug into my skin, cutting off circulation, and I could already feel warmth trickling down my arms, blood seeping through the cuts. The sound of dripping water echoed around me, each drop falling somewhere nearby, though I couldn't see where. My vision was blurry, and the room, or whatever place I was in, was dimly lit by faint green light. As my eyes adjusted, shapes started to form in the gloom. To my left, there was a massive stone altar, its surface stained dark red. On the walls, strange symbols glowed faintly, pulsing with an eerie rhythm that matched my heartbeat. A low growl broke the silence, sending shivers down my spine. I turned my head toward the noise, straining against the chains. Out of the shadows emerged a creature unlike anything I'd ever seen. Its body was long and lean, covered in scaly black skin that shimmered under the green light. 4 glowing yellow eyes stared at me hungrily, and its mouth stretched wide, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. It moved closer, circling me slowly, its tail dragging along the ground behind it. Every step it took sent vibrations through the floor, rattling the chains that held me captive. I wanted to scream, to beg for mercy, but my voice was gone. All I could do was watch helplessly as the creature lowered its head until it was inches away from mine. Its hot, fetid breath washed over me, making me gag. Then, without warning, the ground beneath me trembled violently. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and the walls groaned as if they were about to collapse. The creature froze, its eyes darting toward the far end of the room. Whatever it saw made it snarl angrily before slinking back into the shadows. In its place came another figure, taller, more imposing, and infinitely more terrifying. This new figure wore a tattered cloak that billowed around it despite there being no wind. Beneath the hood, 2 pale white hands reached out, their fingers impossibly long and thin. They grabbed the edge of the cloak and pulled it back, revealing a face that made my blood run cold. Its skin was deathly pale, almost translucent, and its lips were sewn shut with thick black thread. A single eye blinked open, glowing bright orange and locked onto mine. "You belong here now," the figure hissed, its voice a raspy whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "There is no escape." I struggled harder against the chains, tears streaming down my face. "Please," I managed to choke out. "Let me go." The figure tilted its head, studying me like a scientist examining a lab specimen. Then it reached out and touched my forehead with one bony finger. Pain exploded in my skull, sharp and blinding, and everything went dark again. When I woke up, the chains were gone, but so was the room. Instead, I stood in a vast field of tall grass that swayed gently in the breeze. The sky above was an unnatural shade of purple, dotted with stars that pulsed like living things. At first, it seemed peaceful, almost beautiful, but the longer I looked, the stranger it became. The grass whispered as it moved, forming words I couldn't understand. And when I stepped forward, the ground beneath my feet shifted, sinking slightly as if trying to pull me under. In the distance, I saw a tree, a twisted, gnarled thing with branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Something hung from those branches, swaying gently in the wind. As I approached, I realized what it was: bodies. Dozens of them, swinging silently, their faces obscured by shadow. One of the bodies turned suddenly, staring directly at me. Its eyes glowed faintly, and its mouth opened in a silent scream. I stumbled backward, tripping over a root hidden in the grass. Before I could get up, the whispers grew louder, surrounding me on all sides. They weren't just sounds anymore. They were voices, speaking in languages I didn't recognize. Some sounded angry, others sad, but all of them carried the weight of despair. Suddenly, the ground split open beneath me and I fell into darkness once more. This time, I landed in a narrow tunnel lined with smooth, wet stone. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling, pooling around my feet. Ahead of me, the tunnel curved sharply, disappearing into the unknown. Without thinking, I started running, desperate to find a way out. The tunnel seemed endless, twisting and turning in ways that defied logic. Every few steps, I passed strange carvings etched into the walls, faces contorted in agony, hands reaching out as if pleading for help. Occasionally, I heard footsteps behind me, soft and deliberate, growing closer with each passing second. When I turned to look, nothing was there, but the feeling of being watched never left me. Finally, the tunnel opened into a cavern even larger than the first one. In the center stood a giant mirror, its surface rippling like water. Around it, dozens of creatures gathered, their forms shifting and changing constantly. Some had human-like features, while others resembled animals or plants. None of them spoke, but their eyes followed me wherever I moved. One of the creatures stepped forward, its body shimmering like liquid silver. "Look into the mirror," it said, its voice echoing softly. "See your true self?" Against my better judgment, I stepped closer. As I gazed into the mirror, my reflection changed. My face warped and twisted, becoming unrecognizable. Fangs grew from my gums, my eyes turned black, and my hands sprouted claws. Horrified, I backed away, but the image stayed with me, burned into my mind. The creatures began to chant, their voices rising in pitch until they became unbearable. My ears rang and my head throbbed painfully. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the chanting stopped abruptly. Silence fell over the cavern, broken only by the sound of my ragged breathing. From the corner of my eye, I caught movement. Turning slowly, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the crowd. It was familiar, yet different somehow. The same glowing orange eye blinked open, locking onto mine. "Your journey has only begun," it said, its voice calm and menacing. "Prepare yourself." And with that, the ground shook again, swallowing me whole. The ground swallowed me whole, and for a moment, I felt weightless, as if I were floating in an endless void. But then the sensation changed. Sharp rocks jabbed into my back and cold water seeped through my clothes. I opened my eyes to find myself lying at the bottom of what looked like an ancient well. The walls were made of cracked stone, covered in moss and slimy green algae. A faint beam of light shone down from above, barely illuminating the space. I tried to stand, but my legs gave out beneath me. My muscles burned with exhaustion, and every movement sent waves of pain through my body. Still, I forced myself to crawl toward the edge of the well, hoping to find some way out. As I reached the wall, I noticed something odd. A series of carvings etched into the stone. They depicted scenes of people being dragged into darkness by shadowy figures, their faces twisted in terror. One carving showed a figure that looked eerily similar to me, surrounded by glowing symbols. A sudden splash behind me made me freeze. Slowly I turned around, heart pounding. Rising from the water was a creature unlike anything I had ever seen. Its body was half human, half fish, with scales that shimmered like gold in the dim light. Its face was beautiful yet terrifying, its eyes wide and unblinking, filled with hunger. It opened its mouth, revealing rows of needle-like teeth, and let out a low growl. I scrambled backward, pressing myself against the wall. The creature stepped closer, its movements fluid and graceful, despite its monstrous appearance. "You shouldn't be here," it hissed, its voice smooth and hypnotic. "This place is not meant for those who belong above. What do you want from me?" I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. The creature tilted its head, studying me carefully. "We wait," it replied cryptically, "for the chosen one. And now that you're here, we must decide. Are you friend or foe?" Before I could respond, the water around us began to churn violently. Another creature emerged, this one larger and more menacing. Its body was covered in barnacles, and its arms ended in sharp claws. It roared loudly, shaking the entire well, and lunged straight at me. I dove to the side just in time, narrowly avoiding its massive claws. The impact sent shockwaves through the well, causing chunks of stone to fall from the ceiling. I scrambled to my feet, searching desperately for a way out. That's when I noticed a narrow tunnel leading upward, partially blocked by debris. Without hesitation, I charged toward it, dodging another swipe from the second creature. As I climbed through the tunnel, the creatures followed closely behind, their growls echoing off the walls. The passage was steep and treacherous, with loose rocks threatening to dislodge at any moment. Several times I nearly slipped, but adrenaline kept me moving forward. Finally, after what felt like hours, I reached the top and burst into fresh air. But instead of finding safety, I found myself in another strange landscape. This one was barren and desolate, with jagged cliffs stretching endlessly in every direction. The sky was a deep crimson, streaked with black clouds that seemed alive, writhing and twisting like smoke. In the distance, I could hear a haunting melody, a chorus of voices singing in a language I didn't understand. Following the sound, I walked cautiously along the edge of a cliff. The path was narrow, with sheer drops on either side, and the wind howled fiercely, threatening to knock me off balance. Despite the danger, I couldn't resist the pull of the music. It was beautiful yet unsettling, filling me with both longing and dread. After what felt like miles, I came upon a massive structure carved directly into the rock face. It looked like a temple, with towering columns and intricate carvings covering every surface. At the entrance stood two statues, each depicting a grotesque creature with multiple heads and wings spread wide. Their eyes glowed faintly, following me as I approached. Inside, the temple was even stranger. The floor was paved with black marble, reflecting the flickering blue flames that lit the room. Along the walls hung tapestries showing scenes of battles between humans and otherworldly beings. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, upon which rested a small, ornate box. It was made of silver and adorned with strange runes that pulsed softly with light. As I stepped closer, the music grew louder, almost deafening. My hands trembled as I reached for the box, unsure of what I might find inside. Before I could touch it, however, the ground beneath me shook violently. The statues outside roared to life, their stone forms breaking apart to reveal living creatures. They charged into the temple, blocking my escape. One of them spoke, its voice deep and rumbling. "You dare disturb our sanctuary? You will pay dearly for your intrusion." I backed away slowly, my heart racing. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," I said, raising my hands in surrender. "I was just looking for answers." "Answers come at a price," the creature growled. "And tonight, the price is yours." With that, the creatures advanced, their claws gleaming in the dim light. I spun around, searching for a way out, but the temple doors had sealed shut. Trapped and terrified, I turned back to face them, knowing I had no choice but to fight, or die trying. Just as the first creature lunged at me, the box on the pedestal began to glow brighter, emitting a soft hum that resonated throughout the chamber. The creatures froze mid-motion, their glowing eyes narrowing as they stared at the artifact. Slowly, the lid of the box creaked open, revealing a single object nestled within. A key shaped like a star and radiating an ethereal light. The creatures exchanged wary glances before turning their attention to me. "Take it," one of them snarled. "But beware, the path it opens leads to places beyond your wildest nightmares." Without thinking, I grabbed the key and sprinted toward the now unsealed door. Behind me, the creatures erupted into chaos, arguing over whether to pursue me or protect the temple. Taking advantage of their distraction, I slipped outside and ran as fast as I could, the key clutched tightly in my hand. Where would this key lead me? What secrets did it hold? And most importantly, why had it chosen me? These questions raced through my mind as I fled across the desolate landscape, the haunting melody still ringing in my ears. Somewhere ahead, I knew lay answers, but also dangers far greater than anything I'd faced so far. Stay tuned for the next chapter of my harrowing tale. Don't forget to click the link in the description to discover the special surprise waiting just for you. Stay safe as we continue with the story. I ran until my legs burned and my lungs screamed for air, but the key in my hand felt like it was pulling me forward. The landscape around me shifted as I moved, twisting into shapes that shouldn't have been possible. Trees bent backward, their branches scraping the ground like skeletal fingers. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, writhing and curling as if alive. Every step I took seemed to lead me deeper into madness. The haunting melody grew louder, wrapping itself around me like a cold embrace. It wasn't just music anymore, it was a voice, whispering secrets in a language I couldn't understand but somehow felt. My skin prickled with goosebumps as the words seeped into my mind, planting seeds of doubt and fear. Was I running towards safety? Or was I being lured into another trap? Suddenly, the ground beneath me gave way and I tumbled into a dark pit. For a moment, there was nothing but silence and darkness. Then I landed with a thud on something soft, but not quite alive. Opening my eyes, I saw that I was surrounded by piles of clothes, books, toys, and other things people might leave behind. Each item looked old and worn as if they'd been forgotten for years. But when I reached out to touch one, a small stuffed bear, it let out a low growl, its stitched mouth splitting open to reveal sharp teeth. I yanked my hand back just in time, scrambling away from the pile. More objects began to move, their forms shifting and contorting. A doll's head twisted around completely, its glassy eyes locking onto mine. A book snapped shut violently, its pages flipping wildly before spilling out black smoke that coiled around my ankles. Even the clothes started to writhe, forming shapes that almost looked human, except they weren't. They were hollow, faceless, and empty, yet they moved with purpose, crawling toward me with clawed hands made of threadbare fabric. Panic surged through me and I scrambled to my feet, kicking and swatting at the animated objects. Some dissolved into dust when touched, while others fought back, biting or scratching at me. Blood trickled down my arm from where a pair of scissors had nicked me, and I gritted my teeth against the pain. There had to be a way out of this nightmare. I just needed to find it. In the corner of the room, I spotted a door half hidden behind a mountain of debris. Without hesitation, I bolted toward it, dodging a swinging hammer and leaping over a chair leg that tried to trip me. The door creaked open easily, revealing a narrow staircase leading upward. I didn't stop to think about what might be waiting above. I climbed as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. At the top of the stairs, I found myself in a long hallway lined with doors. Each door was different. Some were painted bright colors, others were plain wood, and a few were rusted iron. Strange noises came from behind them, muffled laughter, whispered conversations, and occasional screams. One door even emitted a soft glow, as though inviting me inside. But I knew better than to trust anything here. As I hesitated, trying to decide which door to choose, a shadow moved along the wall beside me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Slowly, I turned to face whatever, or whoever, was following me. Standing at the end of the hallway was a figure cloaked in darkness. Its shape kept changing, flowing like liquid, making it impossible to tell if it was human or something else entirely. When it spoke, its voice was a chorus of whispers, layered and overlapping until it sounded like hundreds of people talking at once. "You can't run forever," it said, its tone calm but menacing. "This place is part of you now." "What do you mean?" I stammered, backing away instinctively. "It means," the figure stepped closer, its form solidifying slightly. Beneath the hood, I caught a glimpse of glowing yellow eyes. "You belong here." Before I could respond, the walls of the hallway began to close in, squeezing tighter and tighter. The air grew thick and heavy, pressing down on my chest. Desperate, I lunged toward the nearest door and threw it open. On the other side, I found myself in a forest unlike any I'd ever seen. The trees were impossibly tall, their trunks covered in glowing moss that lit up the area with a pale green light. Between the trees, strange creatures flitted about, some resembling birds, others looking more like insects, but all of them watching me with curious eyes. At first, I thought I might finally be safe. That illusion shattered quickly. From the shadows emerged a pack of wolf-like creatures, their fur slick and oily, reflecting the eerie light. Their eyes glowed red, and their teeth gleamed as they bared them in warning. They circled me slowly, their movements deliberate and calculated. One of them growled low in its throat, the sound vibrating through the air. I backed away, searching for a weapon or some kind of escape route. My fingers brushed against the key still clutched in my hand, and an idea sparked in my mind. Raising the key high above my head, I shouted, "Stay back. I don't know what this does, but I'll use it." For a moment, the creatures paused, their glowing eyes fixed on the key. Then one of them lunged, not at me but at the key itself. I swung it wildly, hitting the creature across the snout. It yelped in pain and stumbled back, giving me enough time to turn and run deeper into the forest. The trees seemed to shift as I ran, rearranging themselves to block my path. Roots shot out of the ground, tripping me while branches whipped down, slashing at my skin. Still, I pressed on, fueled by sheer determination. Somewhere ahead, I heard water rushing. A river or stream, maybe, and I aimed for that sound, hoping it would lead me to safety. When I finally broke through the trees, I found myself standing on the edge of a cliff overlooking a roaring river. The water churned violently, filled with jagged rocks and whirlpools that threatened to pull anything near them under. Across the river, a bridge hung precariously, its wooden planks rotting and its ropes frayed. It swayed gently in the wind, daring me to cross. There was no other choice. Taking a deep breath, I stepped onto the bridge, testing each plank carefully before putting my full weight on it. Halfway across, the wolves appeared on the opposite bank, howling angrily and snapping at the air. One of them leaped onto the bridge, its claws tearing into the wood as it advanced toward me. I ran faster, ignoring the creaks and groans of the structure beneath my feet. Just as I reached the far side, the bridge collapsed behind me, sending the wolf tumbling into the raging waters below. I collapsed onto the ground, panting heavily, my body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. But even as I lay there, I knew this wasn't over. The key in my hand pulsed faintly, reminding me of the journey still ahead. Where would it take me next? What dangers lurked beyond this point? And why did everything seem to revolve around me? These questions swirled in my mind as I stood up, brushing dirt off my clothes and gripping the key tightly. Whatever came next, I had to face it head on. Because turning back wasn't an option anymore. As I stood there, clutching the key tightly, the world around me seemed to blur and shift. The ground beneath my feet trembled slightly, and the air grew colder, sending shivers down my spine. A low hum filled the space, growing louder with each passing second. It wasn't just a sound, it vibrated through my bones, making me feel both excited and terrified at the same time. The forest behind me began to fade, its trees melting into mist like they were never really there. In their place, a vast expanse of fog rolled in, swallowing everything in sight. The river below stopped roaring and became eerily still, its waters turning a deep, dark color that reflected nothing, not even the pale light from above. And then, out of the fog, shapes started to form. At first, they were vague outlines, tall, thin figures standing silently in the distance. But as the fog cleared, I saw them more clearly. They weren't human, but they weren't animals either. Their bodies shimmered like heat waves on a summer day, constantly shifting between forms. Some had too many arms, others had no faces, and all of them stared at me with eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. One of the figures stepped forward, breaking away from the group. It was taller than the rest, with long, spindly limbs that ended in claw-like hands. Its head was elongated, almost snake-like, and it didn't have a mouth, but when it spoke, its voice echoed in my mind, chilling me to the core. "You carry the key," it said, its tone neither friendly nor hostile, just curious. "But do you know what it unlocks?" I shook my head, my voice trembling as I replied, "No, I don't." "It opens doors," the figure continued, taking another step closer. "Doors to places you can't imagine. Places where time doesn't exist, where rules are broken, and where shadows come alive." My heart raced. Why me? Why did the key choose me? The figure tilted its head, studying me carefully. "Perhaps because you're brave enough to keep going. Or perhaps because you're foolish enough to believe you have a choice." Before I could respond, the ground beneath me shifted again, this time splitting open. A staircase carved into the rock appeared, leading downward into darkness. The glowing-eyed figures didn't move, they simply watched as I hesitated at the edge. Taking a deep breath, I descended the stairs, the key still clutched tightly in my hand. With each step, the air grew heavier, pressing down on my chest like an invisible weight. The walls around me were smooth and cold, covered in strange markings that pulsed faintly with light. They looked like maps, but instead of showing cities or rivers, they depicted emotions: fear, anger, sadness, joy, all tangled together in intricate patterns. At the bottom of the staircase, I found myself in a large cavern. The ceiling stretched high above, disappearing into the darkness. In the center of the room stood a massive door, its surface covered in the same glowing symbols as the walls. It looked ancient, as if it had been there for centuries, waiting for someone to open it. Approaching the door, I noticed a small keyhole near the top. Without hesitation, I inserted the key and turned it. There was a loud click, followed by a rumbling sound as the door slowly creaked open. Beyond it lay another world, a city unlike anything I'd ever seen. The streets were paved with black glass that reflected the sky above, which was a swirling mix of colors: reds, purples, blues, and greens. Buildings towered into the clouds, their designs bizarre and otherworldly. Some looked like giant spirals, others like upside-down pyramids, and a few resembled living creatures frozen mid-motion. The air smelled metallic, and every breath I took made my throat burn slightly. People, or at least things that looked like people, walked the streets going about their business as if this was perfectly normal. Most of them ignored me, but a few turned to stare, their eyes wide and unblinking. One woman approached me, her skin pale and her hair flowing like smoke. She smiled, revealing teeth that were far too sharp to be human. "Welcome," she said, her voice soft and melodic. "You've arrived just in time for the festival." "Festival?" I asked, confused. "What festival?" "The Festival of Shadows," she replied, her smile widening. "It happens once every 100 years, when the boundaries between worlds grow thin. Tonight anything is possible." Before I could ask more questions, she walked away, leaving me alone in the middle of the crowded street. Around me, the atmosphere grew darker, the colors in the sky deepening until the entire city was bathed in an unnatural twilight. Music began to play, loud, chaotic, and haunting, and the crowd erupted into cheers. Following the sound, I wandered deeper into the city, passing strange sights along the way. Vendors sold food that looked edible but glowed ominously. Children played games with toys that moved on their own. And everywhere, shadows danced across the walls, forming shapes that seemed to whisper secrets only they knew. Eventually, I reached the center of the city, where a massive stage had been set up. On the stage stood a figure cloaked in darkness, its presence commanding and intimidating. As it raised its arms, the music stopped abruptly, and the entire crowd fell silent. "You've come far," the figure said, its voice booming across the square. "But your journey is far from over. Tonight you will face your greatest fear. Only then will you truly understand why you were chosen." Fear gripped my heart as the crowd parted, revealing a narrow path leading away from the city. At the end of the path stood another door, this one smaller and simpler than the last. Yet somehow it felt more dangerous. My legs moved without thinking, carrying me toward the door despite every instinct screaming at me to run. When I opened the door, I found myself back in my bedroom. Everything looked exactly as it should: the bed, the desk, the lamp, but something was off. The air felt heavier, the shadows deeper, and the silence oppressive. Turning around, I saw the key lying on the floor, its glow fading slowly. And then, I heard it, a soft whisper coming from the corner of the room. "We're waiting?" I froze, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. The whisper came again, softer this time but clearer. "We're waiting?" It wasn't just one voice, it was many, layered on top of each other like a choir of the dead. Each word sent chills down my spine, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was right behind me. The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in as if they were alive. Shadows stretched unnaturally long across the floor, writhing and twisting like snakes. My eyes darted around, searching for any sign of movement, but everything seemed still. Too still. That's when I noticed it, the faint glow coming from under my bed. At first I thought it was just the lamp, but no, it was different. This light pulsed, almost breathing, casting strange patterns on the ceiling above. Curiosity, or maybe sheer terror, forced me to take a step closer. As I leaned over, the glow grew brighter, revealing a crack in the wooden slats beneath the mattress. Through the crack, I could see a small, glowing object resting on the floor below. Without thinking, I reached down to grab it, but before my fingers could touch it, the bed shifted. The entire frame groaned loudly, tipping forward ever so slightly. I stumbled back, landing hard on the floor. The bed creaked again, louder this time, and then, it moved. Slowly, deliberately, the legs of the bed began to shift, sinking into the ground as if the floor itself was swallowing it whole. Panic surged through me as I scrambled to my feet, but the bed didn't stop. It kept sinking deeper and deeper until finally, it disappeared completely, leaving behind a gaping hole in the middle of my room. From the darkness below, I heard a sound, a low growl, deep and guttural, followed by the sound of claws scraping against stone. My breath caught in my throat as two glowing red eyes emerged from the shadows, staring up at me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. Whatever was down there, it wasn't alone. More eyes appeared, dozens of them, all watching me silently. For a moment I considered running. But where would I go? The door was locked, the window too high to climb out of, and the rest of the house felt miles away. Trapped, I backed up against the wall, clutching the key tightly in my hand. If this thing wanted me, it would have to fight for it. The creature, or rather creatures, didn't waste any time. One by one they climbed out of the hole, their forms shifting and changing as they emerged. Some looked like wolves, others like cats, and a few resembled nothing I'd ever seen before. Their bodies shimmered with an unnatural sheen, and their teeth gleamed in the dim light. One of the creatures stepped forward, its movements fluid and graceful despite its size. It was taller than the others, with fur that looked more like liquid metal than hair. Its eyes locked onto mine, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw recognition in them. Then it spoke, not with words but with thoughts that echoed directly in my mind. "You shouldn't be here," it said, its voice smooth and hypnotic. "This place isn't meant for you." "Then why am I here?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why did the key bring me?" The creature tilted its head, studying me carefully. "Keys open doors," it replied cryptically. "But sometimes they also lock them. You've entered a world you cannot leave." "Not yet." Before I could ask what it meant, the other creatures lunged. They moved faster than I thought possible, their claws swiping at me with deadly precision. I dodged and weaved, using furniture as cover, but there were too many of them. Every time I thought I had escaped, another would appear, blocking my path or snapping at my heels. Desperation fueled me, and I swung the key like a weapon, striking out at anything that came near. To my surprise, the creatures recoiled whenever the key touched them, hissing in pain as if it burned their skin. Encouraged, I pressed the attack, driving them back toward the hole. But as soon as one retreated, another took its place, and soon I was surrounded once more. That's when I noticed the symbols etched into the walls. They glowed faintly, pulsing in rhythm with the key in my hand. An idea formed in my mind. If these symbols were connected to the key, maybe they could help me escape. Without hesitation, I ran toward the nearest wall, pressing the key against one of the glowing marks. The reaction was immediate. The symbol flared brightly, sending waves of energy rippling through the room. The creatures howled in agony, their forms dissolving into smoke as the light consumed them. But the light didn't stop there. It spread outward, illuminating every corner of the room and revealing secrets hidden in the shadows. Behind the wardrobe, I saw a door I'd never noticed before. It was old and weathered, covered in cobwebs and dust, but it stood solid and unyielding. The keyhole was barely visible, almost buried beneath layers of grime. Without hesitation, I inserted the key and turned it. There was a loud click, followed by a rumbling sound as the door slowly creaked open. On the other side, I found myself standing at the edge of a cliff overlooking a vast ocean. The waves crashed violently against the rocks below, spraying water high into the air. Above me, the sky was filled with swirling clouds, their colors shifting constantly between red, purple, and black. And in the distance, I saw a ship, a massive vessel with sails that glowed faintly in the dark. A figure stood on the deck, cloaked in shadows but unmistakably human. It waved at me, beckoning me closer. Despite the danger, something about the scene felt familiar, as if I'd been here before, or perhaps dreamed of it. Hesitating only for a moment, I stepped forward, leaving the safety of the cliff behind. As I approached the ship, the world around me began to blur and fade. The waves stilled, the wind died down, and the sky turned a deep, impenetrable black. When I finally reached the deck, the figure turned to face me, pulling back its hood to reveal a face both kind and terrifying. "You've come far," it said, its voice warm but tinged with sadness. "But your journey is far from over. Are you ready?" I opened my mouth to reply, but before I could speak, the scene shifted again. The figure's question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. "Are you ready?" it asked again, its voice softer this time, as if it already knew the answer. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, a strange sensation washed over me, a mixture of excitement and dread, like standing on the edge of a cliff and knowing you're about to jump. The ship beneath my feet began to move, gliding smoothly across the now calm waters. The glowing sails shimmered faintly, casting an otherworldly light that illuminated the deck. Around me, more figures emerged from the shadows, some human, others not so much. They moved silently, their faces obscured by hoods or masks, watching me with unreadable expressions. One of them stepped forward, holding out a small wooden box carved with intricate designs. "Take this," the figure said, its voice low and melodic. "It will guide you when the path becomes unclear." Without hesitation, I accepted the box, feeling its weight settle into my palm. It was warm to the touch, almost alive, and the carvings seemed to shift and change whenever I looked away. Inside, I found a compass unlike any I'd ever seen. Instead of pointing north, its needle spun wildly, stopping only when it pointed directly at me. "What does it mean?" I asked, confusion clouding my mind. "It means," the figure replied, "that your destination is within you. Trust yourself, and the compass will lead you where you need to go." Before I could ask anything else, the ship lurched suddenly, throwing me off balance. A loud creak echoed through the air, followed by the sound of splintering wood. Looking over the side, I saw massive tentacles rising from the depths, their surfaces covered in barnacles and slime. Each one was thicker than the ship itself, and they moved with purpose, wrapping around the hull and pulling us downward. Panic surged through me as the crew sprang into action. Some grabbed ropes, tying them securely to the mast, while others wielded axes, hacking at the tentacles that dared to breach the deck. The figure who had given me the compass stood calmly near the edge, raising its hands toward the sky. A soft glow emanated from its palms, growing brighter until it lit up the entire area. For a moment, the creature paused, its many eyes blinking in surprise. Then, with a deafening roar, it lunged forward, its tentacles smashing against the deck with enough force to send splinters flying everywhere. Several crew members were thrown overboard, disappearing into the churning waters below. Others fought back desperately, using whatever weapons they could find. I ran to the railing, gripping it tightly as another tentacle swung toward me. At the last second, I dove out of the way, landing hard on the deck. Rolling to my feet, I spotted the compass still clutched in my hand. Its needle spun wildly once more, finally settling on a direction I hadn't noticed before, the hold of the ship. Without thinking, I raced below deck, dodging falling debris and avoiding the flailing tentacles. The hold was dimly lit, with crates stacked haphazardly along the walls. In the center of the room stood a large chest, its surface covered in rust and moss. The compass pulsed brightly, drawing me closer. Reaching the chest, I fumbled with the lock, my fingers trembling with fear and anticipation. Finally, the lid creaked open, revealing a single object nestled inside. A lantern made of crystal, its surface etched with glowing runes. As soon as I touched it, the runes flared to life, bathing the room in a soft golden light. Above me, the creature let out another roar, this one filled with pain rather than anger. Slowly, its tentacles unraveled, retreating back into the depths of the ocean. When I returned to the deck, the ship was battered but intact. The surviving crew members cheered, their faces lighting up with relief. The figure who had given me the compass approached me, studying the lantern closely. "You've done well," it said, its voice tinged with pride. "But remember, every victory comes at a cost. What you've awakened tonight may bring both light and shadow into your path." Before I could ask what it meant, the ship began to shake violently. The horizon ahead grew darker, swirling with storm clouds that crackled with electricity. Lightning forked through the sky, illuminating a massive structure rising from the water. A fortress built entirely of black stone, its spires reaching toward the heavens. As we drew closer, the gates of the fortress creaked open, revealing a vast courtyard filled with strange creatures. Some resembled humans, but with elongated limbs and hollow eyes. Others were monstrous, their bodies twisted and malformed. All of them turned to stare at the approaching ship, their gazes piercing and unwavering. The figure placed a hand on my shoulder, its grip firm but gentle. "This is your next challenge," it said. "Beyond those gates lies knowledge and danger. Only you can decide whether to proceed." My heart raced as the ship docked at the edge of the fortress. The crew began to disembark, some hesitating while others marched forward without fear. I stood frozen for a moment, staring at the looming gates, wondering if I was truly ready for what lay ahead. Then, without warning, the ground beneath me shifted. A deep rumble echoed through the fortress, and the gates slammed shut with a resounding crash. The creatures outside scattered, vanishing into the shadows as quickly as they had appeared. But inside the courtyard, something stirred, a presence far older and more powerful than anything I had encountered so far. From the shadows emerged a figure cloaked in darkness, its form indistinct yet commanding. Its voice resonated through the air, sending shivers down my spine. "You have come far," it said, echoing the earlier words of the figure on the ship. "But do you truly understand why?" Before I could answer, the lantern in my hand flared brightly, casting light into the deepest corners of the courtyard. For a brief moment, I saw everything clearly, the hidden paths, the secret doors, and the truths buried beneath the surface. And then, just as quickly, the light faded, leaving me once again in the dark. The darkness pressed in around me, heavy and suffocating. The figure cloaked in shadows stood just a few steps away, its presence overwhelming. Its voice echoed through the courtyard, wrapping itself around my thoughts like a cold embrace. "Do you truly understand why you are here?" it asked again, each word dripping with menace. I wanted to answer, but my tongue felt glued to the roof of my mouth. My mind raced, searching for some kind of explanation, something that made sense. But all I could think about was the lantern in my hand, how it had flared so brightly, revealing secrets hidden in the shadows. Whatever this place was, it wasn't ordinary. And whatever role I played in it, it was bigger than I could comprehend. The figure took a step closer, its form becoming clearer, or at least less indistinct. It wasn't human, not entirely. Its body shimmered faintly as if it existed between worlds, and its eyes glowed with an inner fire that sent chills down my spine. "You carry tools meant for others," it said, gesturing toward the lantern and the key still clutched tightly in my other hand. "Yet you wield them as if they belonged to you. What do you mean?" I finally managed to croak, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "Who am I supposed to be?" The figure tilted its head, studying me carefully. For a moment it seemed almost curious. Then, without warning, it raised a hand, pointing directly at me. A bolt of energy shot out, striking the ground at my feet. The impact sent shockwaves rippling through the courtyard, throwing me off balance. When I looked up, the air around the figure began to distort, forming shapes that twisted and writhed like living things. These weren't just illusions, they were real. From the swirling vortex emerged creatures unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Some were small, no larger than rats, with spindly legs and glowing eyes. Others were massive, their bodies towering above the fortress walls, their roars shaking the very foundations of the structure. They moved with purpose, surrounding me in a tight circle, their glowing eyes fixed on me with hunger. My breath came in short gasps as I backed away, trying to keep as much distance as possible between myself and the creatures. The lantern in my hand pulsed faintly, its light growing brighter with each passing second. Desperation fueled me, and I swung it wildly, hoping to drive the monsters back. To my surprise, it worked. The creatures recoiled whenever the light touched them, hissing and snarling in pain. But there were too many of them. Every time I drove one back, another took its place. My arms grew tired, my movements slower and less effective. One of the smaller creatures lunged, its sharp teeth grazing my arm and drawing blood. Pain seared through me, and I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the lantern. That's when I noticed the symbols etched into the stones beneath my feet. They glowed faintly, matching the rhythm of the lantern's pulse. An idea formed in my mind. If the lantern could repel the creatures, maybe the symbols could help me escape. Without hesitation, I pressed the base of the lantern against one of the glowing marks. The reaction was immediate. The symbol flared brightly, sending waves of energy rippling outward. The creatures howled in agony, their forms dissolving into smoke as the light consumed them. But the light didn't stop there. It spread outward, illuminating every corner of the courtyard and revealing secrets hidden in the shadows. Behind me, I saw a door carved into the stone wall, its surface covered in intricate designs that pulsed in time with the lantern. Without thinking, I ran toward the door, inserting the key into the lock and turning it. There was a loud click, followed by a rumbling sound as the door slowly creaked open. Beyond it lay a narrow corridor, dimly lit by torches mounted on the walls. The air smelled damp and musty, and the sound of dripping water echoed softly in the distance. As I stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind me, plunging the corridor into darkness. For a moment, I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. Then, the lantern in my hand flared to life once more, casting a soft golden glow around me. The corridor stretched endlessly in both directions, lined with doors on either side. Each door bore a different symbol, glowing faintly in the dim light. Curiosity, and perhaps a hint of fear, drew me forward. I approached the first door, examining the symbol etched into its surface. It looked familiar, though I couldn't quite place where I'd seen it before. Reaching out, I placed the lantern against the symbol, feeling its warmth seep into my palm. The door creaked open, revealing a room filled with shelves upon shelves of ancient books. The books weren't normal, they glowed faintly, their pages flipping on their own as if alive. One book floated off its shelf, opening to reveal words written in a language I didn't recognize. Yet somehow I understood them. They spoke of choices, of paths untaken, and of destinies yet unwritten. As I read, the room shifted around me, the shelves melting into mist and reforming into new shapes. When I looked up, I found myself standing in a vast library, its ceiling stretching impossibly high. Around me, figures moved silently, reading from glowing books or writing in journals that sparkled with light. None of them paid attention to me, lost in their own worlds. In the center of the room stood a massive desk, atop which rested a single book bound in black leather. Drawn by an unseen force, I walked toward the desk, my footsteps echoing softly in the silence. The book seemed to call to me, its presence commanding and irresistible. Reaching out, I opened it, revealing pages filled with images and words that danced and shifted before my eyes. Among them, I saw glimpses of my past, present, and future, moments of joy, sorrow, triumph, and terror. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the vision faded. The library dissolved, ved into mist, leaving me standing alone in the corridor once more. The lantern in my hand pulsed faintly, guiding me forward toward the next door. The lantern's glow led me to the next door, its surface etched with a symbol that pulsed softly, almost as if it were breathing. My heart raced as I approached, every step echoing in the silent corridor. The air grew colder, and a faint breeze whispered through the narrow space, carrying with it the scent of something metallic, like iron or blood. It made my stomach churn, but I couldn't stop now. As I reached for the door, the symbol flared brighter, casting strange shadows on the walls. For a moment, those shadows seemed to move independently, stretching and twisting into shapes that shouldn't have been possible. A figure emerged from one of them, a tall, gaunt form with glowing red eyes that locked onto mine. Its lips curled into a sneer, revealing sharp teeth that glinted even in the dim light. "You shouldn't be here," it hissed, its voice low and menacing. "Turn back while you still can." I froze, my hand hovering just inches from the doorknob. Part of me wanted to listen, to turn around and run as far away as possible. But another part, deeper and stronger, urged me forward. This was my journey, my path, and no shadowy figure was going to stop me. With a deep breath, I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room beyond was unlike anything I'd ever seen. The floor was made of glass, revealing a swirling vortex beneath my feet. Stars and galaxies spun endlessly below, their light casting an eerie glow on everything around me. The walls were lined with mirrors, each reflecting not my current self, but versions of me from different times and places. One mirror showed a younger version of myself, standing in a field under a bright blue sky, laughing carelessly. Another depicted an older, more weathered me, staring out over a vast ocean with a look of profound sadness. Yet another revealed a version of me cloaked in darkness, wielding weapons I didn't recognize, surrounded by chaos and destruction. Each reflection felt both familiar and alien, like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't quite put together. A soft voice echoed through the room, though I couldn't tell where it came from. "Who are you?" it asked, simple yet haunting. "What defines you?" The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I looked around at the countless reflections, searching for an answer. Was I the happy child? The weary traveler? The dark warrior? Or was I something else entirely? Before I could respond, the mirrors began to shatter, one by one, their shards falling into the vortex below. With each break, the room trembled violently, sending shock waves through the glass floor. I stumbled backward, trying to keep my balance, but the shaking only grew worse. From the center of the vortex rose a massive creature, its body a swirling mass of light and shadow. Its face was featureless, except for two glowing orbs where eyes should have been. It loomed over me, its presence overwhelming, and spoke directly into my mind. "You seek answers," it said, its voice a chorus of whispers. "But are you prepared for the truth?" Before I could reply, the creature extended a massive hand, reaching toward me. Instinctively, I raised the lantern, its light flaring brightly as it touched the creature's hand. For a moment, the creature recoiled, its form flickering like a candle flame. Then, with a deafening roar, it surged forward, wrapping its tendrils around me. Pain seared through my body, but it wasn't physical. It was mental, emotional, a flood of memories and sensations that threatened to overwhelm me. I saw glimpses of lives I never lived, battles I never fought, loves I never knew. Each memory burned brighter than the last, until I thought I might explode from the sheer weight of it all. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the vision stopped. The creature dissolved into nothingness, leaving me kneeling on the shattered glass floor, gasping for air. The room had changed, no longer filled with mirrors or a swirling vortex. It was now a simple chamber with a single chair in the center. On the chair sat a small wooden box, identical to the one I'd received earlier. Without hesitation, I opened the box, revealing a single object inside. A feather, delicate and shimmering as if woven from starlight. As soon as I touched it, the feather began to glow, filling the room with a warm, comforting light. A voice, not the creature's but softer, kinder, spoke in my mind. "This is your gift," it said. "Use it wisely." Before I could ask what it meant, the room faded away, replaced by the familiar corridor. The lantern in my hand pulsed softly, guiding me toward the next door. What did the feather mean? Why had the key brought me here? And most importantly, what awaited me beyond the next threshold? Stay tuned for the next chapter of my harrowing tale. Don't forget to click the link in the description to discover the special surprise waiting just for you. The corridor stretched endlessly before me, each step echoing softly against the stone walls. The lantern in my hand pulsed faintly, its golden glow illuminating the next door just ahead. This one was different from the others. It wasn't carved with symbols or designs but instead bore a single word etched into its surface. Remember. As I reached for the doorknob, a chill ran down my spine. Something about this door felt heavier, more significant than the ones before it. My fingers trembled as they wrapped around the cold metal, and for a moment, I hesitated. What lay beyond this threshold? Was it another test, another challenge, or something far worse? But curiosity, or perhaps fate, pushed me forward and I turned the knob. The room inside was dimly lit, with flickering candles casting long shadows across the walls. In the center stood a large table covered in objects that seemed oddly familiar. A broken toy car, a tattered book, an old photograph. Each item carried with it a wave of nostalgia so powerful it nearly brought tears to my eyes. These weren't just random things, they were pieces of my past, memories frozen in time. But as I moved closer, the objects began to change. The toy car twisted and warped until it resembled some kind of monstrous insect. The book's pages flipped violently, revealing words written in blood-red ink. And the photograph shifted, showing not happy faces but shadowy figures staring back at me with hollow eyes. A low whisper filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. It wasn't one voice but many, overlapping and blending until it became impossible to distinguish individual words. The sound made my skin crawl and I spun around, searching for its source. That's when I saw them. Figures emerging from the shadows, their forms shifting and changing like smoke caught in the wind. Some looked human, while others were grotesque parodies of people I once knew. One figure stepped forward, its face obscured by a hood. "You've forgotten," it said, its voice smooth yet chilling. "You've buried these truths deep within yourself, but they will not stay hidden forever." "What truths?" I demanded, clutching the lantern tightly. "What have I forgotten?" The figure tilted its head, studying me carefully. Then, without warning, it raised a hand, pointing directly at me. A bolt of energy shot out, striking the ground at my feet. The impact sent shockwaves rippling through the room, causing the objects on the table to shatter into pieces. Glass shards rained down, embedding themselves in the floor, and the air grew thick with tension. From the shattered remains of the objects emerged creatures, small, writhing things that slithered toward me with unnatural speed. Their bodies gleamed wetly in the candlelight, and their glowing eyes locked onto mine with hunger. Panic surged through me as I swung the lantern wildly, trying to drive them back. To my relief, the light worked. The creatures recoiled whenever it touched them, hissing and snapping their jaws in frustration. But there were too many of them. Every time I drove one away, another took its place. My arms grew tired, my movements slower and less effective. One of the creatures lunged, its teeth grazing my leg and drawing blood. Pain seared through me and I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the lantern. That's when I noticed the symbols etched into the floor beneath my feet. They glowed faintly, matching the rhythm of the lantern's pulse. An idea formed in my mind. If the lantern could repel the creatures, maybe the symbols could help me escape. Without hesitation, I pressed the base of the lantern against one of the glowing marks. The reaction was immediate. The symbol flared brightly, sending waves of energy rippling outward. The creatures howled in agony, their forms dissolving into smoke as the light consumed them. But the light didn't stop there. It spread outward, illuminating every corner of the room and revealing secrets hidden in the shadows. Behind me, I saw a door carved into the wall, its surface covered in intricate designs that pulsed in time with the lantern. Without thinking, I ran toward the door, inserting the key into the lock and turning it. There was a loud click, followed by a rumbling sound as the door slowly creaked open. Beyond it lay a narrow staircase leading downward into darkness. The air smelled damp and musty, and the sound of dripping water echoed softly in the distance. As I descended the stairs, the world around me began to shift. The walls closed in, their surfaces rippling like water. Strange noises came from the shadows, muffled whispers, distant screams, and occasional laughter that sounded anything but joyful. At the bottom of the staircase, I found myself standing in a vast cavern, its ceiling lost in the gloom above. In the center of the cavern stood a massive tree, its trunk black as coal and its branches twisting upward like skeletal fingers. Its roots burrowed deep into the ground, and its leaves shimmered faintly, casting an otherworldly glow over everything around it. Beneath the tree lay a pedestal, atop which rested a small ornate box. It was made of silver and adorned with strange runes that pulsed softly with light. Drawn by an unseen force, I approached the pedestal, my footsteps muffled by the soft earth beneath my feet. The box seemed to call to me, its presence commanding and irresistible. Reaching out, I opened it, revealing a single object nestled inside. A mirror no larger than my palm with a frame carved from obsidian. As soon as I touched it, the mirror flared to life, reflecting not my current self but versions of me from different times and places. I saw glimpses of lives I never lived, battles I never fought, loves I never knew. Each reflection burned brighter than the last, until I thought I might explode from the sheer weight of it all. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the vision stopped. The mirror went dark, leaving me standing alone in the cavern, trembling with exhaustion and uncertainty. What did the mirror reveal? Why had the key brought me here? And most importantly, what awaited me beyond the next threshold? Stay tuned for the next chapter of my harrowing tale. Don't forget to click the link in the description to discover the special surprise waiting just for you. The mirror went dark, its surface as smooth and lifeless as a pool of still water. But the images it had shown me lingered in my mind, haunting me with their intensity. I stood there for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of everything I'd seen. Each reflection seemed to tell a story, a life lived, a choice made, a path taken or abandoned. And yet, none of them felt entirely real. Were they memories? Dreams? Or something else entirely? A low hum filled the cavern, growing louder with each passing second. The ground beneath my feet began to tremble, sending shockwaves through the earth. The massive tree at the center of the cavern swayed gently, its branches creaking like old bones. Then, without warning, its roots shifted, pulling away from the soil to reveal a hidden chamber beneath. Curiosity, or perhaps some deeper instinct, drew me closer. As I peered into the darkness below, the air grew colder, and a faint breeze carried the scent of decay. Something moved in the shadows, a shape too large to be human, too fluid to be solid. My heart raced as I stepped back, gripping the lantern tightly in one hand and the obsidian-framed mirror in the other. The figure emerged slowly, its form shifting and changing with every step. At first, it looked almost human, tall and slender, with glowing eyes that pierced through the gloom. But as it drew nearer, its features twisted and warped until it resembled nothing I'd ever seen before. Its skin shimmered like liquid metal, and its limbs stretched unnaturally long, ending in sharp claws. A low growl rumbled in its chest, vibrating through the cavern walls. "You've come far," it said, its voice a blend of whispers and echoes. "But you don't belong here." "I didn't ask to be here," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "I just want answers." The creature tilted its head, studying me carefully. "Answers cost more than you realize," it said, taking another step forward. "Are you willing to pay the price?" Before I could respond, the ground beneath us gave way, plunging us both into darkness. For a moment, there was nothing but silence and falling. Then, with a loud splash, I landed in icy water, the shock stealing my breath away. Around me, the cavern had transformed into an underwater world, its walls covered in glowing coral and strange sea creatures that darted through the murky depths. The creature surfaced beside me, its form now resembling a giant octopus with glowing red eyes. It wrapped one of its tentacles around my waist, pulling me closer despite my struggles. "You're running out of time," it hissed, its voice distorted by the water. "Choose wisely or you'll be trapped here forever." Panic surged through me as I scanned the surroundings, searching for a way out. In the distance, I saw a faint light emanating from a tunnel carved into the rock. Without hesitation, I kicked toward it, using the creature's grip to propel myself forward. The water resisted, dragging me backward, but I fought against it with every ounce of strength I had. As I reached the tunnel, the creature released me, sinking back into the darkness with a satisfied chuckle. "We'll meet again," it called after me, its voice fading into the depths. The tunnel led to a narrow passageway lined with jagged rocks that glowed faintly in the dark. The air was thick and heavy, carrying the scent of damp earth and something metallic. Footsteps echoed ahead, soft and deliberate, drawing me forward despite my fear. At the end of the passage, I found myself standing in a vast chamber lit by flickering torches mounted on the walls. In the center of the room stood a throne, its surface carved from black stone and adorned with strange symbols that pulsed faintly with light. On the throne sat a figure cloaked in shadows, its face obscured by a hood. As I approached, the figure raised a hand, silencing the whispers that filled the chamber. "You've traveled far," it said, its voice deep and resonant, "and survived much. But your journey is far from over. What do you seek?" "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I just need to understand why this is happening to me." The figure tilted its head, studying me carefully. "Understanding comes at a price," it said. "Are you prepared to pay it?" Before I could answer, the floor beneath me shifted, revealing a massive pit filled with writhing shadows. They reached up, clawing at the edges, their glowing eyes fixed on me with hunger. My breath caught in my throat as the figure gestured toward the pit. "Jump," it commanded, its tone leaving no room for argument. "Only then will you find the truth." The figure's command hung in the air, heavy with expectation. "Jump," it said again, its voice calm but unyielding. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared into the pit below. The shadows writhed and twisted, their glowing eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Each one seemed to whisper a different fear, a different doubt, pulling at the edges of my mind. I wanted to argue, to beg for more time, but something inside me knew this was no ordinary choice. This wasn't about bravery or cowardice, it was about trust. Trust in myself, in the journey I'd been on, and in whatever waited beyond the edge of that pit. Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward, feeling the cold stone beneath my feet give way as I launched myself into the void. For a moment, there was only darkness, endless, suffocating, and absolute. Then the air around me began to shimmer, breaking apart like glass to reveal a world unlike anything I'd ever imagined. The sky above was a swirling vortex of colors, blues, purples, and greens blending together in a hypnotic dance. Below me stretched a vast landscape of floating islands, each one connected by fragile bridges made of light. Strange creatures flitted between the islands, their forms shifting and changing with every movement. As I descended, I landed softly on one of the islands, its surface covered in soft moss that glowed faintly in the dim light. Around me, trees grew upside down, their roots reaching toward the sky while their branches dangled lazily near the ground. Flowers bloomed in impossible colors, their petals trembling as if alive. It was beautiful, but also unsettling, as though the beauty hid dangers I couldn't yet see. A low hum filled the air, growing louder until it became a chorus of voices. They weren't speaking words, not exactly, but their tones carried meaning all the same. Some were gentle and soothing, while others were sharp and piercing, sending shivers down my spine. Following the sound, I walked deeper into the island, passing strange sights along the way. One tree bore fruit that glowed like lanterns, casting flickering light across the ground. When I reached out to touch one, it pulsed warmly against my fingertips before dissolving into mist. Nearby, a stream flowed upward, defying gravity as it cascaded into the sky. And everywhere, the shadows moved, not just on the ground but in the corners of my vision, always just out of reach. Suddenly, the ground beneath me shifted, sinking slightly as if testing my weight. Startled, I stumbled backward, nearly losing my balance. That's when I noticed them, the faces carved into the rocks. Dozens of them, each one unique, staring up at me with hollow eyes. Their mouths opened silently, forming words I couldn't hear. One face, closer than the rest, seemed familiar, like someone I once knew or maybe someone I could become. Before I could examine it further, the ground trembled violently, throwing me off balance. A massive creature emerged from the shadows, its body a mix of jagged rock and flowing water. Its head resembled a wolf's, but its eyes burned with an inner fire that sent chills down my spine. Without hesitation, it lunged toward me, its claws scraping against the mossy ground. Instinctively, I raised the lantern, its golden glow flaring brightly as it touched the creature's fur. To my relief, the light worked. The creature recoiled, hissing and snapping its jaws in frustration. But it didn't retreat. Instead, it circled me, studying my movements carefully, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Desperation fueled me, and I swung the lantern wildly, trying to keep the creature at bay. For every step it took forward, I took two back, searching for any kind of escape. Behind me, the bridge connecting the island to the next one shimmered faintly, almost inviting. But getting there meant crossing open ground, and facing the creature head-on. With a roar, the creature charged, its speed far greater than I'd anticipated. I dove to the side, narrowly avoiding its massive paws. Rolling to my feet, I sprinted toward the bridge, praying it wouldn't collapse under my weight. The creature followed closely, its growls echoing through the air. As I reached the midpoint of the bridge, it gave way beneath me, sending me plummeting toward the abyss below. Time seemed to slow as I fell, the wind rushing past my ears. Just before impact, a bright light enveloped me, lifting me gently and depositing me safely on the next island. The new island was darker, its surface covered in black sand that shimmered faintly underfoot. In the center stood a massive structure, a temple carved from obsidian, its spires reaching toward the swirling sky. The air here felt heavier, pressing down on my chest with invisible weight. As I approached the temple, the ground trembled and the sand shifted, revealing shapes that writhed and twisted like living things. At the entrance, two statues stood guard, one resembling a lion, the other a serpent. Both were cracked and weathered, their features worn smooth by time. Yet they watched me with unblinking eyes, their presence commanding respect. Reaching the doorway, I hesitated, feeling the pull of something deep within urging me forward. What lay beyond these doors? What secrets would I uncover, and what price would I pay for knowing them? The pull of the temple was undeniable, a force that tugged at my very soul. Despite the weight pressing on my chest and the unsettling feeling in my stomach, I stepped forward, placing one foot inside the obsidian doorway. The air grew colder instantly, as if the warmth of the outside world had been sealed away the moment I crossed the threshold. Inside, the temple was vast, its ceiling lost in shadows that seemed to shift and writhe with every step I took. The walls were lined with carvings, images of battles, sacrifices, and strange rituals performed under glowing moons. Some figures in the carvings looked human, while others were monstrous, their bodies twisted into impossible shapes. The longer I stared, the more the carvings seemed to move, as though they were alive, telling stories only they could understand. At the center of the temple stood a massive pedestal, its surface etched with glowing runes that pulsed softly, like a heartbeat. On top of the pedestal rested an object, a crystal orb no larger than a fist, but radiating light so bright it filled the entire chamber. As I approached, the orb flared brighter, casting long shadows across the floor. Those shadows began to twist and stretch, forming shapes that didn't belong, creatures with too many limbs, faces without eyes, and mouths that opened wide, silent screams frozen in time. My breath caught in my throat as the creatures formed fully, stepping out of the shadows and surrounding me. They weren't solid, not entirely, but their presence was real enough to make my skin crawl. One of them stepped forward, its form shifting between human and something far more terrifying. Its voice echoed in my mind, low and guttural, yet somehow clear. "You've come far," it said, its tone neither friendly nor hostile, just curious. "But you don't know why you're here." "I want answers," I replied, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. "Why am I seeing all this? What does it mean?" The creature tilted its head, studying me carefully. "Answers cost," it said simply. "And some truths are harder to bear than others." Before I could ask what it meant, the orb on the pedestal flared again, this time so brightly that I had to shield my eyes. When I lowered my hand, the temple had changed. The carvings on the walls were gone, replaced by blank stone. The creatures disappeared, leaving only their echoes behind. And the pedestal now held not an orb but a small leather-bound book. The book was simple, its cover worn and cracked with age. But when I reached for it, a wave of energy surged through me, making my fingers tingle. Opening it, I found pages filled with writing, not words but images. Each page showed a different version of myself, each one facing a challenge or making a choice. Some versions succeeded, others failed, and still others ended in ways too tragic to imagine. As I flipped through the pages, the images began to change, blending together until they formed a single scene. A dark forest, lit only by the glow of the moon. In the center of the forest stood a figure cloaked in shadows, its face obscured but its presence unmistakable. It was me, or at least, a version of me older and wiser, standing at the edge of a precipice. The figure turned toward me, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. "You must choose," it said, its voice echoing in my mind. "Will you follow the path of light or the path of shadow?" Before I could answer, the book snapped shut, pulling me back to the temple. The pedestal was empty now, and the room felt smaller, suffocating even. The air smelled metallic, like iron, and the silence was deafening. A low rumble shook the temple, sending cracks spider webbing across the floor. From the shadows emerged another figure, taller and more imposing than any I'd seen before. Its body shimmered like liquid metal, its face a mask of perfect neutrality. It raised a hand, pointing directly at me. "Your time is running out," it said, its voice smooth and hypnotic. "Decide now or be lost forever." Panic surged through me as the ground beneath me gave way, plunging me into darkness once more. For a moment there was nothing. No sound, no light, no sensation. Then I landed with a thud on soft earth, surrounded by the smell of damp leaves and moss. Looking up, I saw the sky, a swirling mass of colors shifting and changing like liquid fire. Around me, the landscape shifted constantly, forming and reforming into new shapes. Trees grew and fell in the blink of an eye, rivers flowed backward, and mountains crumbled into dust. In the distance, I heard laughter, high-pitched and eerie, like the sound of children playing in a graveyard. Following the noise, I walked deeper into the chaos, searching for its source. When I finally reached the source, I found a clearing bathed in pale moonlight. At its center stood a circle of stones, each one carved with symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. Inside the circle lay a figure, me. Or rather, a version of me younger and smaller, lying asleep on the ground. Surrounding the figure were other versions of myself, each one representing a different age or stage of life. They watched silently, their eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my skin prickle. One of them stepped forward, her face calm but sorrowful. "You've come full circle," she said, her voice soft and melodic. "Now you must decide which path to take." "What paths?" I asked, confusion clouding my mind. She gestured toward two doors that hadn't been there before, one made of golden light, the other of deep shadow. "Each door leads to a different future," she explained. "Choose wisely." Before I could respond, the ground trembled violently, throwing me off balance. The circle of stones shattered, and the versions of myself dissolved into mist. Only the two doors remained, glowing faintly in the fading light. What would I choose? Light or shadow? Hope or despair? And would either choice lead me back to where I belonged? The two doors loomed before me, their glow casting eerie shadows across the clearing. The golden door shimmered with warmth and promise, its light inviting and comforting. The shadowy door, on the other hand, exuded a cold, unsettling energy that made my skin crawl. Yet there was something about it, a pull, a whisper in the back of my mind, that refused to let me ignore it. I stood frozen, torn between the two choices. My heart raced, pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. The wind picked up, swirling leaves and dust around me in a chaotic dance. It felt like the world itself was waiting for my decision, holding its breath alongside me. Then, from behind the golden door, a soft melody drifted into the clearing. It was beautiful, haunting, and strangely familiar, like a lullaby I'd heard long ago but couldn't quite remember. The sound wrapped around me, soothing my nerves and calming my racing thoughts. Without thinking, I took a step toward the golden door, drawn by the promise of safety and peace. But as I moved closer, a low growl rumbled through the air, stopping me in my tracks. From behind the shadowy door emerged a figure cloaked in darkness, its form shifting and changing with every movement. Its glowing red eyes locked onto mine, piercing through the veil of calm the melody had created. "You can't run from who you are," it hissed, its voice a blend of whispers and echoes. "The light may offer comfort, but it hides truths. The shadows, though feared, reveal what lies beneath." Its words struck a chord deep within me, stirring emotions I'd buried long ago. Doubt crept into my mind, planting seeds of uncertainty. What if the figure was right? What if the golden door wasn't the answer I sought? Could I truly find myself in the light when so much of my journey had been shrouded in darkness? As I hesitated, the clearing began to shift and warp around me. The ground trembled, splitting open to reveal a chasm filled with writhing shadows. They reached out, clawing at the edges, their glowing eyes fixed on me with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. The trees bent and twisted, their branches forming strange shapes that whispered secrets only they could understand. The air grew colder, carrying with it the scent of decay and something metallic, like blood. A voice echoed through the chaos, not from the figure or the doors, but from within me. "This isn't just about choosing a path," it said, calm yet insistent. "It's about accepting who you are, and all that comes with it." The realization hit me like a tidal wave, washing away the fear and doubt that had clouded my mind. Both doors represented parts of me, the light, my hopes and dreams, the shadows, my fears and uncertainties. To choose one over the other would mean denying a piece of myself, and I couldn't do that. Not anymore. With newfound determination, I stepped forward, placing one hand on each door. The golden door flared brightly, filling the clearing with warmth and light. The shadowy door pulsed darkly, its energy vibrating through my bones. For a moment, the two forces clashed, creating a storm of colors and sounds that threatened to consume everything around me. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the storm subsided. The doors dissolved into nothingness, leaving behind a single object, a small wooden box identical to the ones I'd encountered earlier. Inside the box lay a key, not the one I'd carried throughout my journey, but a new one forged from both light and shadow. Its surface glowed faintly, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. Before I could examine it further, the ground beneath me shifted again, this time lifting me high into the air. The clearing disappeared, replaced by a vast expanse of stars and galaxies stretching endlessly in every direction. Below me I saw worlds, some familiar, others alien, each one connected by threads of light and shadow. And at the center of it all was a massive structure, a palace built from both gold and obsidian, its spires reaching toward the heavens. As I descended toward the palace, figures emerged from the shadows, some human, others not so much. They watched me silently, their faces unreadable. Among them was the figure from the temple, its liquid metal body shimmering in the starlight. It raised a hand, pointing directly at the palace gates. "Your journey is far from over," it said, its voice smooth and hypnotic. "But now you walk the path of balance, a path few have dared to tread. Choose wisely, for the fate of many rests in your hands." The gates opened slowly, revealing a grand hall filled with mirrors. Each mirror reflected a different version of myself, some happy, some sad, some fierce, some fragile. As I walked among them, I realized something profound. None of these versions were wrong. They were all pieces of me, fragments of a whole that had been scattered across time and space. At the end of the hall stood another door, this one unmarked and plain. Reaching out, I placed the new key in the lock and turned it. There was a loud click, followed by a rumbling sound as the door creaked open. Beyond it lay a world unlike any I'd ever seen, a place where light and shadow danced together in perfect harmony, where fear and hope coexisted, and where every choice led to a new beginning. But as I stepped through the threshold, a voice whispered softly in my ear, "Remember, the journey never truly ends. What lies beyond this new world? Will I find answers or more questions? And what challenges await me on this path of balance?" Stay tuned for the next chapter of my harrowing tale. Don't forget to click the link in the description to discover the special surprise waiting just for you. Until next time, stay safe. And remember, sometimes the greatest journeys begin when we embrace both our light and our shadows. The world beyond the door was unlike anything I had ever imagined. The sky above was a swirling tapestry of colors, vivid blues, fiery oranges, and deep purples blending together in a hypnotic dance. The ground beneath my feet wasn't solid but felt more like walking on clouds, soft and yielding with every step. Yet, despite its beauty, there was an unsettling undercurrent to this place. The air carried a faint hum, almost musical, but tinged with something sharp and discordant, like nails scraping against glass. As I ventured further, the landscape began to shift around me. Trees grew upside down, their roots reaching toward the sky while their branches dangled low, brushing against my shoulders as I passed. Flowers bloomed in impossible hues, glowing softly and pulsing rhythmically as if they were alive. Streams flowed upward, defying gravity, and strange creatures flitted between the trees, their forms shifting and changing with every movement. One moment they looked like birds, the next like fish, and then something entirely unrecognizable. Despite the surreal beauty, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Shadows moved at the corners of my vision, always just out of reach when I turned to look. A low whisper filled the air, growing louder until it became a cacophony of voices speaking in languages I didn't understand. Some sounded angry, others sad, and a few even seemed to laugh, a cold, hollow sound that sent shivers down my spine. I quickened my pace, trying to escape the oppressive atmosphere, but the path ahead only grew stranger. The ground tilted unnaturally, forcing me to walk uphill even though the horizon remained flat. The trees twisted into grotesque shapes, their branches forming faces that stared down at me with hollow eyes. One tree leaned close, its bark splitting open to reveal a mouth filled with jagged teeth. It spoke in a voice that echoed through my mind, low and guttural. "You cannot run from what you are," it growled. "Accept it or be consumed." Before I could respond, the ground beneath me gave way, plunging me into darkness. For a moment there was nothing, no sound, no light, no sensation. Then I landed with a thud on a surface that felt both hard and squishy, like stepping onto a bed of coiled snakes. Around me, the space expanded into a vast cavern lit by flickering blue flames. The walls were covered in carvings, scenes of battles, sacrifices, and strange rituals performed under glowing moons. Each carving pulsed faintly as if alive, and the longer I stared, the more they seemed to move. In the center of the cavern stood a massive stone altar, its surface stained dark red. On top of the altar lay an object, a mask made of obsidian, its surface etched with intricate designs that glowed faintly in the dim light. As I approached, the mask flared brightly, casting long shadows across the floor. Those shadows began to twist and stretch, forming shapes that didn't belong, creatures with too many limbs, faces without eyes, and mouths that opened wide, silent screams frozen in time. A figure emerged from the shadows, its form shimmering like liquid metal. Its face was obscured by a hood, but its glowing red eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "You've come far," it said, its voice smooth and hypnotic. "But you don't know why you're here." "I want answers," I replied, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. "Why am I seeing all this? What does it mean?" The figure tilted its head, studying me carefully. "Answers cost," it said simply. "And some truths are harder to bear than others." Before I could ask what it meant, the mask on the altar flared again, this time so brightly that I had to shield my eyes. When I lowered my hand, the cavern had changed. The carvings on the walls were gone, replaced by blank stone. The creatures disappeared, leaving only their echoes behind. And the altar now held not a mask, but a small leather-bound book. The book was simple, its cover worn and cracked with age. But when I reached for it, a wave of energy surged through me, making my fingers tingle. Opening it, I found pages filled with writing, not words but images. Each page showed a different version of myself, each one facing a challenge or making a choice. Some versions succeeded, others failed, and still others ended in ways too tragic to imagine. As I flipped through the pages, the images began to change, blending together until they formed a single scene. A dark forest, lit only by the glow of the moon. In the center of the forest stood a figure cloaked in shadows, its face obscured but its presence unmistakable. It was me, or at least, a version of me older and wiser, standing at the edge of a precipice. The figure turned toward me, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. "You must choose," it said, its voice echoing in my mind. "Will you follow the path of light or the path of shadow?" Before I could answer, the book snapped shut, pulling me back to the cavern. The altar was empty now, and the room felt smaller, suffocating even. The air smelled metallic, like iron, and the silence was deafening. A low rumble shook the cavern, sending cracks spider-webbing across the floor. From the shadows emerged another figure, taller and more imposing than any I'd seen before. Its body shimmered like liquid metal, its face a mask of perfect neutrality. It raised a hand, pointing directly at me. "Your time is running out," it said, its voice smooth and hypnotic. "Decide now or be lost forever." Panic surged through me as the ground beneath me gave way once more, plunging me into darkness. This time, however, I didn't land on solid ground. Instead, I floated in a void filled with stars and galaxies, their light casting long shadows across the emptiness. Around me, whispers grew louder, forming words I couldn't quite understand. They spoke of choices, of paths untaken, and of destinies yet unwritten. In the distance, I saw a structure, a palace built from both gold and obsidian, its spires reaching toward the heavens. Surrounding it were figures, some human, others not so much. They watched me silently, their faces unreadable. Among them was the figure from the cavern, its liquid metal body shimmering in the starlight. It raised a hand, pointing directly at the palace gates. "Your journey is far from over," it said, its voice smooth and hypnotic. "But now you walk the path of balance, a path few have dared to tread. Choose wisely, for the fate of many rests in your hands." The gates opened slowly, revealing a grand hall filled with mirrors. Each mirror reflected a different version of myself, some happy, some sad, some fierce, some fragile. As I walked among them, I realized something profound. None of these versions were wrong. They were all pieces of me, fragments of a whole that had been scattered across time and space. At the end of the hall stood another door, this one unmarked and plain. Reaching out, I placed the new key in the lock and turned it. There was a loud click, followed by a rumbling sound as the door creaked open. Beyond it lay a world unlike any I'd ever seen. A place where light and shadow danced together in perfect harmony, where fear and hope coexisted, and where every choice led to a new beginning. But as I stepped through the threshold, a voice whispered softly in my ear, "Remember, the journey never truly ends. What lies beyond this new world? Will I find answers or more questions? And what challenges await me on this path of balance?" Stay tuned for the next chapter of my harrowing tale. Don't forget to click the link in the description to discover the special surprise waiting just for you. Until next time, stay safe. And remember, sometimes the greatest journeys begin when we embrace both our light and our shadows. The world beyond the threshold was both breathtaking and unnerving. The sky above shimmered with a kaleidoscope of colors, shifting from deep blues to fiery reds and back again in an endless cycle. The ground beneath my feet felt alive, pulsating softly as if it were breathing. Yet, despite its beauty, there was an unsettling tension in the air, a low hum that vibrated through my bones, making me feel as though I were being watched by unseen eyes. As I ventured further, the landscape began to twist and warp around me. Trees grew upside down, their roots reaching toward the heavens while their branches dangled low, brushing against my skin like cold fingers. Flowers bloomed in impossible hues, glowing faintly and emitting soft whispers that seemed to speak directly to my mind. Streams flowed upward, defying gravity, and strange creatures flitted between the trees, their forms shifting constantly, sometimes resembling birds, sometimes fish, and other times something entirely unrecognizable. Every step I took felt heavier than the last, as if the very air resisted my movement. Shadows moved at the edges of my vision, always just out of reach when I turned to look. A low whisper filled the air, growing louder until it became a cacophony of voices speaking in languages I didn't understand. Some sounded angry, others sad, and a few even laughed, a cold, hollow sound that sent shivers down my spine. I quickened my pace, trying to escape the oppressive atmosphere, but the path ahead only grew stranger. The ground tilted unnaturally, forcing me to walk uphill even though the horizon remained flat. The trees twisted into grotesque shapes, their branches forming faces that stared down at me with hollow eyes. One tree leaned close, its bark splitting open to reveal a mouth filled with jagged teeth. It spoke in a voice that echoed through my mind, low and guttural. "You cannot run from what you are," it growled. "Accept it or be consumed." Before I could respond, the ground beneath me gave way, plunging me into darkness. For a moment there was nothing, no sound, no light, no sensation. Then I landed with a thud on a surface that felt both hard and squishy, like stepping onto a bed of coiled snakes. Around me, the space expanded into a vast cavern lit by flickering blue flames. The walls were covered in carvings, scenes of battles, sacrifices, and strange rituals performed under glowing moons. Each carving pulsed faintly as if alive, and the longer I stared, the more they seemed to move. In the center of the cavern stood a massive stone altar, its surface stained dark red. On top of the altar lay an object, a mask made of obsidian, its surface etched with intricate designs that glowed faintly in the dim light. As I approached, the mask flared brightly, casting long shadows across the floor. Those shadows began to twist and stretch, forming shapes that didn't belong, creatures with too many limbs, faces without eyes, and mouths that opened wide, silent screams frozen in time. A figure emerged from the shadows, its form shimmering like liquid metal. Its face was obscured by a hood, but its glowing red eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "You've come far," it said, its voice smooth and hypnotic. "But you don't know why you're here." "I want answers," I replied, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. "Why am I seeing all this? What does it mean?" The figure tilted its head, studying me carefully. "Answers cost," it said simply. "And some truths are harder to bear than others." Before I could ask what it meant, the mask on the altar flared again, this time so brightly that I had to shield my eyes. When I lowered my hand, the cavern had changed. The carvings on the walls were gone, replaced by blank stone. The creatures disappeared, leaving only their echoes behind. And the altar now held not a mask but a small leather-bound book. The book was simple, its cover worn and cracked with age. But when I reached for it, a wave of energy surged through me, making my fingers tingle. Opening it, I found pages filled with writing, not words but images. Each page showed a different version of myself, each one facing a challenge or making a choice. Some versions succeeded, others failed, and still others ended in ways too tragic to imagine. As I flipped through the pages, the images began to change, blending together until they formed a single scene. A dark forest, lit only by the glow of the moon. In the center of the forest stood a figure cloaked in shadows, its face obscured but its presence unmistakable. It was me, or at least, a version of me older and wiser, standing at the edge of a precipice. The figure turned toward me, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. "You must choose," it said, its voice echoing in my mind. "Will you follow the path of light or the path of shadow?" Before I could answer, the book snapped shut, pulling me back to the cavern. The altar was empty now, and the room felt smaller, suffocating even. The air smelled metallic, like iron, and the silence was deafening. A low rumble shook the cavern, sending cracks spider-webbing across the floor. From the shadows emerged another figure, taller and more imposing than any I'd seen before. Its body shimmered like liquid metal, its face a mask of perfect neutrality. It raised a hand, pointing directly at me. "Your time is running out," it said, its voice smooth and hypnotic. "Decide now or be lost forever." Panic surged through me as the ground beneath me gave way once more, plunging me into darkness. This time, however, I didn't land on solid ground. Instead, I floated in a void filled with stars and galaxies, their light casting long shadows across the emptiness. Around me, whispers grew louder, forming words I couldn't quite understand. They spoke of choices, of paths untaken, and of destinies yet unwritten. In the distance, I saw a structure, a palace built from both gold and obsidian, its spires reaching toward the heavens. Surrounding it were figures, some human, others not so much. They watched me silently, their faces unreadable. Among them was the figure from the cavern, its liquid metal body shimmering in the starlight. It raised a hand, pointing directly at the palace gates. "Your journey is far from over," it said, its voice smooth and hypnotic. "But now you walk the path of balance, a path few have dared to tread. Choose wisely, for the fate of many rests in your hands." The gates opened slowly, revealing a grand hall filled with mirrors. Each mirror reflected a different version of myself. Some happy, some sad, some fierce, some fragile. As I walked among them, I realized something profound. None of these versions were wrong. They were all pieces of me, fragments of a whole that had been scattered across time and space. At the end of the hall stood another door, this one unmarked and plain. Reaching out, I placed the new key in the lock and turned it. There was a loud click, followed by a rumbling sound as the door creaked open. Beyond it lay a world unlike any I'd ever seen. A place where light and shadow danced together in perfect harmony, where fear and hope coexisted, and where every choice led to a new beginning. But as I stepped through the threshold, a voice whispered softly in my ear, "Remember, the journey never truly ends. What lies beyond this new world? Will I find answers or more questions? And what challenges await me on this path of balance?" Stay tuned for the next chapter of my harrowing tale. Don't forget to click the link in the description to discover the special surprise waiting just for you. Until next time, stay safe. And remember, sometimes the greatest journeys begin when we embrace both our light and our shadows. The world beyond the door was a labyrinth of shifting corridors and whispering shadows. The air felt thick, like it was alive, pulsating with an energy that prickled my skin. The walls around me shimmered, their surfaces rippling as if made of liquid. Strange symbols glowed faintly along the edges, forming patterns that seemed to change every time I blinked. Each step I took echoed softly, but the sound grew distorted, stretching into eerie whispers that whispered secrets I didn't want to hear. As I moved deeper into the labyrinth, the corridors began to twist and turn in impossible ways. What had once been straight paths now curved sharply, leading me in circles or vanishing entirely. Doors appeared where there were none before, each one different from the last. One door was carved from solid gold, its surface etched with intricate designs that pulsed with light. Another was made of black iron, its surface cold to the touch and covered in runes that glowed ominously. Yet another was nothing more than a gap in the wall, framed by jagged edges that seemed to drip with darkness. I reached for the golden door first, my hand trembling as I touched its smooth surface. The moment my fingers brushed against it, the door flared brightly, blinding me momentarily. When my vision cleared, I found myself standing in a vast library filled with floating books. Each book hovered silently, their pages flipping on their own, revealing words written in glowing ink. Some of the books spoke, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of sound. They told stories of forgotten worlds, ancient battles, and choices that shaped destinies. One book floated closer, its cover depicting a mirror cracked down the middle. As it opened, I saw two versions of myself staring back at me, one smiling confidently, the other crying silently. The sight sent a chill through me and I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the lantern. The book vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind only silence. The next door I tried was the one made of black iron. Its surface was icy cold, sending shivers up my arm as I touched it. This time, when the door opened, I was greeted by a field of tall grass that swayed gently in a breeze I couldn't feel. The sky above was a swirling mass of colors, blues, purples, and greens blending together in a hypnotic dance. But the beauty of the scene was marred by the creatures lurking among the grass. Their forms shifted constantly, making them hard to focus on, but I could see glowing eyes peeking out from between the blades. One creature stepped forward, its body resembling a mix of human and animal features. It tilted its head, studying me carefully. "Why are you here?" it asked, its voice smooth but laced with curiosity. Before I could answer, the ground beneath me trembled violently, throwing me off balance. The creature lunged, its claws scraping against the earth where I had just been standing. Instinctively, I swung the lantern, its light flaring brightly and driving the creature back. But others emerged from the grass, their numbers growing with every passing second. Desperation fueled me, and I ran, weaving through the labyrinth until I found myself back at the plain wooden door. Without hesitation, I pushed it open, stepping into a chamber unlike any I'd seen before. The room was circular, its walls lined with mirrors that reflected not my current self, but countless versions of me, some happy, some sad, some fierce, and some broken. In the center stood a pedestal, atop which rested a small, ornate box. It was made of silver and adorned with strange runes that pulsed softly with light. Reaching for the box, I felt a surge of warmth flow through my fingers. Inside, I found a single object, a feather, delicate and shimmering as if woven from starlight. As soon as I touched it, the feather began to glow, filling the room with a soft, comforting light. A voice, not the creature's but softer, kinder, spoke directly into my mind. "This is your gift," it said. "Use it wisely." Before I could ask what it meant, the mirrors shattered, their shards falling to the ground and dissolving into mist. The chamber faded away, replaced by a narrow path winding through a forest of towering trees. The air smelled fresh, carrying the scent of pine and earth, but the shadows between the trees shifted unnaturally, forming shapes that watched me with hollow eyes. The path led me to a clearing bathed in pale moonlight. At its center stood a figure cloaked in shadows, its face obscured but its presence unmistakable. It was me, or rather, a version of me older and wiser, standing at the edge of a precipice. The figure turned toward me, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. "You must choose," it said, its voice echoing in my mind. "Will you follow the path of light or the path of shadow?" Before I could respond, the ground beneath me gave way, plunging me into darkness once more. For a moment there was nothing, no sound, no light, no sensation. Then I landed with a thud on a surface that felt both hard and squishy, like stepping onto a bed of coiled snakes. Around me, the space expanded into a vast cavern lit by flickering blue flames. The walls were covered in carvings, scenes of battles, sacrifices, and strange rituals performed under glowing moons. In the center of the cavern stood a massive stone altar, its surface stained dark red. On top of the altar lay an object, a mask made of obsidian, its surface etched with intricate designs that glowed faintly in the dim light. As I approached, the mask flared brightly, casting long shadows across the floor. Those shadows began to twist and stretch, forming shapes that didn't belong, creatures with too many limbs, faces without eyes, and mouths that opened wide, silent screams frozen in time. A figure emerged from the shadows, its form shimmering like liquid metal. Its face was obscured by a hood, but its glowing red eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "You've come far," it said, its voice smooth and hypnotic. "But you don't know why you're here." "I want answers," I replied, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. "Why am I seeing all this? What does it mean?" The figure tilted its head, studying me carefully. "Answers cost," it said simply. "And some truths are harder to bear than others." Before I could ask what it meant, the mask on the altar flared again, this time so brightly that I had to shield my eyes. When I lowered my hand, the cavern had changed. The carvings on the walls were gone, replaced by blank stone. The creatures disappeared, leaving only their echoes behind. And the altar now held not a mask, but a small leather-bound book. Stay tuned for the next chapter of my harrowing tale. Don't forget to click the link in the description to discover the special surprise waiting just for you. Until next time, stay safe, and remember, sometimes the hardest truths are the ones we need to hear the most. The book on the altar pulsed faintly, drawing me closer despite the fear gripping my heart. Its cover was worn and cracked, but when I touched it, a surge of warmth spread through my fingers. Opening it, I found pages filled with images, not words but scenes that felt strangely familiar. Each page showed a different version of myself, facing challenges or making choices that shaped who I am today. Some versions succeeded, others failed, and still others ended in ways too tragic to imagine. As I flipped through the pages, the images began to blur together, forming a single scene, a dark forest under a blood-red moon. In the center stood a figure cloaked in shadows, its face obscured but its presence unmistakable. It was me, or at least, a version of me older and wiser, standing at the edge of a precipice. The figure turned toward me, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. "You must choose," it said, its voice echoing in my mind. "Will you follow the path of light or the path of shadow?" Before I could answer, the book snapped shut, pulling me back to the cavern. The altar was empty now, and the room felt smaller, suffocating even. The air smelled metallic, like iron, and the silence was deafening. Then, without warning, the ground beneath me gave way once more, plunging me into darkness. This time, however, I didn't land on solid ground. Instead, I floated in a void filled with stars and galaxies, their light casting long shadows across the emptiness. Around me, whispers grew louder, forming words I couldn't quite understand. They spoke of choices, of paths untaken, and of destinies yet unwritten. In the distance, I saw a structure, a palace built from both gold and obsidian, its spires reaching toward the heavens. Surrounding it were figures, some human, others not so much. They watched me silently, their faces unreadable. Among them was the figure from the cavern, its liquid metal body shimmering in the starlight. It raised a hand, pointing directly at the palace gates. "Your journey is far from over," it said, its voice smooth and hypnotic. "But now you walk the path of balance, a path few have dared to tread. Choose wisely, for the fate of many rests in your hands." The gates opened slowly, revealing a grand hall filled with mirrors. Each mirror reflected a different version of myself, some happy, some sad, some fierce, some fragile. As I walked among them, I realized something profound. None of these versions were wrong. They were all pieces of me, fragments of a whole that had been scattered across time and space. At the end of the hall stood another door, this one unmarked and plain. Reaching out, I placed the new key in the lock and turned it. There was a loud click, followed by a rumbling sound as the door creaked open. Beyond it lay a world unlike any I'd ever seen. A place where light and shadow danced together in perfect harmony, where fear and hope coexisted, and where every choice led to a new beginning. But as I stepped through the threshold, everything changed. The beauty of the world around me faded, replaced by an overwhelming sense of dread. The sky above darkened, turning a deep, ominous black, while the ground beneath my feet shifted and cracked, revealing a chasm filled with writhing shadows. From the depths rose creatures unlike anything I'd encountered before, their forms shifting constantly, their glowing eyes locking onto mine with hunger. One creature stepped forward, its voice low and menacing. "You thought you understood," it hissed. "But you've only scratched the surface." Before I could react, the ground collapsed beneath me, sending me tumbling into the abyss. For what felt like eternity, I fell, surrounded by whispers and screams that echoed through the void. When I finally landed, I found myself back in my bedroom, the same room where this entire nightmare had begun. Everything looked exactly as it should, the bed, the desk, the lamp. But something was off. The air felt heavier, the shadows deeper, and the silence oppressive. Turning around, I saw the key lying on the floor, its glow fading slowly. And then, I heard it, a soft whisper coming from the corner of the room. "We're waiting?" My breath caught in my throat as the shadows began to move, stretching and twisting into shapes that shouldn't exist. Their glowing eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time, I truly understood. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. And so, my journey continues. Stay tuned for more.